You're watching GMT on BBC World News. Our top stories. A humanitarian pause is meant to have taken effect in Syria's eastern Ghouta. Most guns have for now fallen silent, so why has no aid been delivered? The armed school officer...
I really believe, you don't know until you test it, but I think I really believe I'd run in there even if I didn't have a weapon. And I think most of the people in this room would have done that too.
And learn to speak like Black Panther. We'll look at the real-life language of Wakanda. Hello and welcome to GMT. I'm Lucy Hockings. There should have been a brief pause in the war in Syria to bring badly needed humanitarian relief and evacuate civilians from the rebel-held enclave of eastern Ghouta. But so far, no aid has gone in, no civilians have come out. Around 400,000 people are trapped, and in the last week, more than 560 people have been killed, some reportedly from the effects of chlorine gas exposure. Russia now says there is extensive fire from the rebel side and that's preventing civilians from leaving, but the rebels are denying any shelling. Moeed is a resident of eastern Ghouta. He has been speaking to the BBC about the risks of leaving now.
Do you trust your killers? Do you trust the regime that is killing you 5 years, maybe 7 now? Do you trust him? Do you trust him on your family and your wife? Do you trust the Russian that is bombing and shelling us from the beginning of this brutal war? It's really a big decision for a father to make.
An update to bring you as well. We are now hearing from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights just in the past few minutes. They are now saying that airstrikes have hit 2 towns in eastern Ghouta, but I have to say the military are denying this report. So different views, of course, coming in on what is happening in eastern Ghouta. We'll be going to Martin Patience in Beirut for the very latest shortly here on GMT. The BBC has learned, though, that women in Syria have been sexually exploited by men delivering aid on behalf of the UN and international charities. A new report says that men would trade food and transportation in return for sexual favours. Danielle Spencer is a humanitarian worker who conducted focus groups with these women. She spoke to our diplomatic correspondent, James Landau.
So they were withholding the aid that had been delivered and then using these women for sex. So this was a range of women. There were women of different ages in the group. Some had experienced it themselves. Some were very distraught. I remember one woman crying in the room. She was very upset. You know, women and girls need to be protected when they are trying to receive food and soap and basic items to live. You know, the last thing you need is a man who you're supposed to trust and be supposed to receive aid from, then asking you to have sex with him and withholding that aid from you.
Danielle Spencer there talking to James Landau, just looking more into those allegations. More, of course, on what is happening though in eastern Ghouta coming up just as soon as we can get in contact with Martin Patience. But here is James Landau now.
In southern Syria, it's very dangerous for international aid workers to go there, so they largely use local partners to deliver their aid. And what we've learned is that in that process, some of the men who've been delivering that aid, called local councils, they're sort of local community leaders, have been abusing that position of trust to demand sex in return for aid. In other words, you can get another bag of grain if you come home with me tonight, or you can get further up the queue if you come home with me tonight, or I can give you a lift home in my car with all your heavy bags if you come home with me tonight. Now, Danielle Spencer, who you just saw, she heard about this from Syrian refugees in Jordanian camps, refugee camps, in 2015. She did a bit of a study. She brought it to a meeting, at that same meeting of the UN in Amman in Jordan. another charity, the International Rescue Committee, also said, oh, well, we've heard similar things too. So those warnings were there in 2015. But what it turns out is that that's 3 years ago. Apparently it's still going on. The UN Population Fund, UNFPA, brought out a report at the end of last year called Voices from Syria 2018, and it confirmed that it's still going on. Now, when you talk to anybody about this, we spoke to all the UN agencies and all the charities, they all say, look, we have a zero tolerance of sexual exploitation, we have lots of training and beauty like that, but they all say that they are not aware of any of these cases happening with their own partners that they're operating with in the region.
James Sandar there. A police officer who resigned for failing to confront the gunman who killed 17 people at a school in Florida has hit back after being called a coward by President Trump. Scott Peterson insists that he had taken up a tactical position outside a school building because he believed the shots were originating from outside. At a meeting on gun control at the White House, Mr. Trump told state governors he would have acted more bravely. Here's Peter Burke.
Less than 2 weeks after the attack on their school, students at Stoneman Douglas High have something to raise their spirits. Their hockey players have just become state champions. It's a bittersweet victory for a school still struggling with the aftermath to the shooting.
This wasn't for us, this was for the 17 victims. We played for them. It's so passionate, so emotional, it's all for them.
Since the shooting, the mood in America over gun control appears to have changed. Students have taken to the streets to demand tougher laws, while the president has gone on the offensive. At a meeting with state governors, Mr. Trump rounded on the police officers who he believes didn't do enough to help.
I got to watch some deputy sheriffs performing this weekend. They weren't exactly Medal of Honor winners, all right? The way they performed was, frankly, disgusting.
I'm Scott Peterson.
Scott Peterson, a 32-year veteran officer who'd been assigned to guard the school, resigned last week after it emerged he'd remained outside the building where most of the pupils were killed. He's issued a statement through his lawyer. It says the allegations that Mr. Peterson was a coward and that his performance under the circumstances failed to meet the standards of police officers are patently untrue. For his part, President Trump has suggested his response would have been different.
You know, I really believe, you don't know until you test it, but I think I really believe I'd run in there even if I didn't have a weapon. And I think most of the people in this room would have done that too.
Mr. Trump has suggested some teachers should be armed with guns. The idea has met with strong opposition. The governor of Washington state said he'd been listening to people who would be affected. He told the president they included some that didn't want to be, as he put it, pistol-packing teachers.
Now, I understand you have suggested this, and we suggest things, and sometimes then we listen to people about it. Maybe they don't look so good a little later. So I just suggest we need a little less tweeting here, a little more listening, and let's just take that off the table and move forward.
As the students in Florida prepare to return to their classrooms, the intense debate over how to make America's schools safe goes on. Peter Bowes, BBC News.
There is a big military operation underway in Nigeria to try to locate more than 100 girls abducted by suspected Boko Haram militants. The girls have been missing from their school since last week, and their case, of course, is highly reminiscent of the kidnap 3 years ago of more than 270 schoolgirls from the remote area of Chibok, which led to a huge campaign under the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls. Well, I've been speaking to one of the fathers who has been affected by this latest kidnapping. Katala Buka's 14-year-old daughter Aisha was taken last week. He says he's received little information from the authorities so far.
But now the parents, now we are disturbed totally.
As of now, we the parents are disturbed because today is Monday and the children have spent 7 days with those militants. They're in a very critical condition because they've never experienced such a thing in their lives. Till this moment, there are no hints about their whereabouts. So I'm here to speak on behalf of the fathers of the abducted girls. No more, no less. We need maximum contribution of each and every camp in the world. We also need the help of the state and federal government to help us rescue the girls because they are little children and they haven't experienced such a thing in their lives. I am not with them, but I know that they were abducted by militants. And wherever they are now, they're mentally affected, because the oldest among them is only 20 years old. I can't explain further because I'm not with them. Both the state and federal government have said they will bring them back soon. We're in a bad situation. Me and the family are in a bad situation.
He was quite distressed when I spoke to him earlier. Well, let's take you to Abuja and talk to the founder of Girl Child Africa, Buki Shonabare. Buki, good to see you. How has this been allowed to happen again?
It's been devastating, dealing with the shock and having to have that similarity between what happened almost 4 years ago and now. So this has been quite devastating, even for us and for everyone that has been watching, especially because we didn't expect that such kind of monumental disaster would happen again, since we had Chibok almost 4 years ago, to learn from our past mistake and to also put measures and policies in place to prevent the reoccurrence. So it's been quite hard dealing with this, actually.
So, Buki, do you believe this was absolutely avoidable?
It's absolutely avoidable, because when Chibok girls' abduction happened almost 4 years ago, we talked about the fact that it was unprecedented. We've not had such kind of experience before, where girls are taken in large numbers. So dealing with that and having to learn from that, one would expect that we should have put measures in place to avoid this. Boko Haram has not missed words in their ideologies and in the propagation of their ideologies, that they are against Western education. They are particularly against girls' education. So they've been abducting girls, they've been abducting boys, and one would expect that the federal government of Nigeria should have put measures in place to prevent this Boko Haram advancing in their ideology. So yes, it is an avoidable disaster.
There was a huge amount of pressure put on the government internationally, of course, with the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, but also within Nigeria itself. What kind of reaction has there been this time?
There has been reaction, especially on social media, particularly, where people are condemning the act. People are drawing similarities and parallel lines across what has happened with the Chibok girls issue and this. But when we do a juxtaposition between what happened with the Chibok girls issue and this particular Dapchi girls abduction, we've not seen that outrage as it was. With the Chibok girls issue, the whole world converged. Everyone was talking about the fact that this could have been my sister, it could have been my cousin, it could have been my neighbor. We didn't think that, oh, I'm in the southwestern part of Nigeria, it happened in the northeast. We didn't think that it was happening in Nigeria and I'm from the United States or the United Kingdom. People connected across the lines of our shared humanity. But when you look at what has happened now, it seems to me that indeed that thought that the test of our humanity is in its consistency has actually not been exemplified in this particular instance of the Dapchi girls abduction.
Okay, Buki, good to have your thoughts. Thanks for joining us from Abuja. Buki Shonabare there from Girl Child Africa. Let's bring you up to date with what is happening in Eastern Ghouta. There was meant to be a humanitarian pause to allow aid in and people out. The guns did fall silent for a while, but we know there's been no movement there, and certainly no aid going into Eastern Ghouta. What is exactly going on with the ceasefire? Let's take you to Beirut and join our correspondent